Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday, June 20th. The Transportation and Commerce Committee meeting will come to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Orion.
Here.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Present.
Alderman Browning.
Present.
Chair Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Spencer. We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Who's responsible for the audio? Is there a way to turn down the sensitivity on these mics a little bit? No? Okay. Well, if it sounds like I'm screaming at you, my apologies. I have a fairly loud voice as it is for those of you that are familiar with me, but I'll do my best not to shout in your ears this wonderful Tuesday morning. Next on the agenda, we have the approval of our meeting minutes from Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. I'll entertain a motion on the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
That wasn't a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes of Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023.
Second.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the meeting minutes from our May 23rd meeting. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Orion.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Chair Cone.
Aye.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Spencer. We have 4 aye votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, you sustain the motion to approve our meeting minutes from May 23rd. This morning, as I'm sure many of the folks in attendance today are interested, we have 2 items on our agenda. One is Board Bill 33, the other one is Board Bill 34. Those both pertain to short-term rentals. Just some context for those who have joined us this morning. We are not planning on taking a vote on either of these board bills this morning. This hearing is solely to solicit public input on the bills, to hear from the sponsor, to start the public education process around what the bills contain, and hear from you all. That's what we're here for today. I've spoken with the sponsor of the bill. It's his intent that we have a few hearings to continue the public education and solicitation process. As the bill evolves, you all will certainly hear about it, I'm sure, in the media, but also the city's website is a wonderful resource if you haven't already visited it. We've taken some strides in the last several years to make sure that board bills are updated online. So any iterations of it that are adopted in committee, you'll be able to hear or see those out on the city's website. And of course, we have our wonderful crew from STL TV, which is our public access network. So if you aren't able to attend meetings, you can certainly follow them on YouTube to get the latest and greatest updates in terms of the public conversation that's taking place with respect to either of these board bills. With that, I will entertain the sponsor of the bills to come to the podium and share with us some background. While he's walking, if you haven't already, there should be 2 sheets at the front of the room here for anyone who is wanting to speak in favor or opposition to either one of the board bills. And what we will do is go through the list, kind of alternating between pros and cons, those in favor and those opposed. And since we do have so many folks here, I would like to try and keep everyone's remarks to 3 minutes. I'll remind you all when we get to that part of the hearing now, but please, if you haven't already, sign up to speak if you're willing and wanting to do so. Alderman.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. So Board Bill number 33 and 34, as the chairman noted, are both in regards to short-term rental. These are bills that are, really 5 years in the making now. There's been a lot of meat grinding done to even get to where we're at right now. I anticipate, as the chairman noted, asking for additional hearings here as we get more public input and as we hear more and learn more from what other cities have done on this. We are at kind of a reflection point on some other cities' legislation regarding short-term rentals. Board Bill 33 is the actual regulations. Board Bill 34 is a board bill that needed to be passed in order to pass muster with the Planning Commission. I also want to thank Alderwoman Ingracia and Alderwoman Navarro, former Alderwoman Ingracia and former Alderwoman Navarro, for their work on this issue. They were the ones kind of leading the charge several years back, and I've really just picked up a lot of what they had worked on and trying to push it across the finish line here. I also have Sarah Baker with me from the mayor's office to answer any questions that I may struggle with based on the fact that this legislation had been worked on for years before I was on it. So I think really to lay out the framework, right now we're kind of in the Wild West regarding short-term rentals in the city of St. Louis, and that's any rental that's for less than a period of months. So this would not affect a landlord who wants to have a 6-month lease or a year lease or a 3-month lease. That is not what this legislation is geared towards. This is for landlords seeking to lease property for less than 1 month's time. And we're basically seeking to begin to regulate it. At this point, many other cities have laid out regulations and are on their second and third iterations of these regulations. The city of St. Louis, for whatever reason, was slow to jump on it, so we do have a late mover advantage of learning from some of the mistakes that some other jurisdictions have made. We know that when we've talked to some of our constituents, I'm sure that you have heard, would like to ban short-term rentals altogether. We know from other jurisdictions that have sought to do so, what happens is that a injunction is put on the city through the courts, through that jurisdiction, through the courts, saying, hey, we're going to allow these short-term rentals during the pendency of litigation, and some of them are 2 years, 3 years out from the complete ban on short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are still happening, and they've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on litigation. We certainly don't want to go down that route. I certainly don't want to go down that route. I would much rather lay out a regulatory framework and try and thread the needle in between what the residents of the city, the average resident of the city wants, what a resident of the city who is operating a short-term rental, what they need to be successful, and ultimately what the platforms need, because if we want to delist problem Airbnbs, we do need some buy-in from the platforms, because or else they could just continue to have that listing, and that listing continues to be rented. Whereas if we do have some buy-in from the platforms, they will remove that listing from the platform, which will really help on some of the problem properties that we've seen. If someone can't rent it, then they're not going to be there. So we also are seeking, we've broken things down into owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied. So if you live in the actual unit, and if you're renting a room of your home, the vast majority of this will not apply to you. This is for people who are renting units that they do not live in. And so they're going to have to get a business license from the city. They're going to have to get a permit from the city for short-term rentals. Those permits have to be held by an actual individual person, not an LLC, so that we don't have some of the same issues that we've had with problem properties in general, where people can play shell games with LLCs, and we end up spending a huge amount of time and energy trying to figure out who the actual owner is, who the individual that needs to be held to account is. Additionally, we're going to limit the number that any LLC can hold that any individual can hold. And that has to do with an affordable housing issue, really. Then on the non-owner occupied units, they'll also be paying commercial tax, which Mike Dauphin, the assessor, is already doing. So that's kind of formally codifying something that is already done in practice. Additionally, if there are problematic operators, the license will be pulled. And then when we pull that license, assuming that we continue to have the buy-in from the platforms that we enjoy right now, that those listings will be removed from the various platforms, and that will prevent people from renting those and hopefully move to stop some of the large parties and other problems that we've had. I could stand up here and read the legislation line for line, but I think it probably makes more sense to try and address any questions or concerns that you all may have, because I know that this is legislation that's been passed around for quite some time, and I know that the general public has had a lot to say about it for many months now. So I'm happy to address any questions, and anything I struggle with. As I said, Sarah Baker is here, and I believe that she could give me the assist.
We'll go ahead and take questions of the sponsor, and then what I'd like to do is ask Sarah Baker, possibly Mr. Dauphin and Mr. Oswald to also, if they have any remarks, to share those with us as well before we dive into the kind of public testimony here. Questions from the committee. Vice Chair Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to wait for the full presentation before asking any questions. Thank you.
Alderwoman Tyus, Alderwoman Velasquez.
Hi, thank you, Alderman Narayan, for bringing this bill. I signed on as a co-sponsor, but just wanted to see if you could talk through the occupancy piece a little bit more. That's, of course, some of the issues we talked about in the Shaw neighborhood and in my ward, or short-term rentals being listed at double, even triple what the building permits for the places are.
On that, I would defer to the building division. I know that they are intending to police that, but on the nuts and bolts of how, I would defer to the commissioner.
Do you have other questions, Alderwoman?
No, that's my main one.
Oh, great. Frank, can you please share name, title?
Sure. I'm Frank Oswald. I'm the building commissioner for the city of St. Louis. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Just can you talk about this bill and in terms of occupancy, because we've just seen time and time again that these short-term rentals currently a lot of times are listed at double, even triple what the building occupancies are. And of course, that is not good.
Yeah, under this bill, what we would require is it's very similar to what we do with housing conservation and the short-term lending things, is we would require a special occupancy for each of these. And the way we envision setting this up essentially is having a website which will be very interactive for people to apply. We will have a special inspection of that particular unit. We'll establish an occupancy load for that unit. We will also have a third-party vendor which actually patrols these various websites. There's third-party vendors who actually look at not just the big platforms that we're all accustomed to utilizing, but a lot of these smaller platforms that are locally based. And what this vendor will do will provide us a daily update as to what those units are that are not licensed to have these. We'll then be in a position where we can go ahead and issue a condemnation. Our plan is to go ahead and have those condemnations automatically sent to the police department. Since we're all in the Department of Public Safety, we're going to work together. Our police department will have access to this information. they'll be able to hopefully prevent some of these situations before they actually get started.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Frank, just feedback for future questions. I've been told that you need to speak more directly into the mic because some of the folks are having difficulty hearing you, but I won't have you repeat all of that at this point, but as questions arise later, I'd appreciate it. Alderman Velasquez, do you have questions of the sponsor?
No more. I'll wait
Okay.
till the rest of the
Thank you.
presentation.
Alderman Browning?
Thank you, and thank you for bringing this legislation forward. I also signed on as a co-sponsor because I think we all acknowledge that there is a need to have some sort of regulation around this subject. You mentioned that the cap of 4 units per permit had to do with affordable housing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, I can, and that's actually one of the questions that I had when I kind of inherited this legislation, is where that number came from. Because I was curious if it came from other jurisdictions or if it was kind of someone pulled it out of a hat. And it seems from the discussions that I have had that former Alderman Page, who represented parts of downtown, to address affordable housing issues, particularly downtown, thought that that number was appropriate, and that's the number that got stuck in there at that time, and it's the number that exists. I want to be clear and say, you know, the reason that I've asked for several hearings on this is because, as far as I'm concerned, nothing about this is set in stone. This is really our first attempt to lay out regulatory framework. So if that number is a huge sticking issue for anyone, or if any other piece of this is, you know, a problem that that I have a blind spot to, I'm certainly open to discussing it. I think what I understand is that at some point they just had to come up with a number, and that's the number they came up with.
In its relationship to affordable housing?
The idea being that we have short-term rental operators throughout the city who sometimes are operating dozens and dozens of these properties. And in many neighborhoods, there's a map which may be in the drive, I'm not positive. If not, I'll make sure it is before the next meeting. A map of the various short-term rental locations throughout the city. And what we're seeing is in many of the neighborhoods throughout, especially through the central corridor, we're seeing more and more what used to be affordable housing and starter homes become these short-term rentals. And you're seeing a lot of people, at least in my neighborhood, you're seeing a lot of people who are from that neighborhood, whose parents live there, grandparents live there, so on and so forth, who can no longer afford to live there. And it's not because all of these houses are full. It's because all of these houses are being used 5 days a month, 10 days a month, and we have some issues if we're displacing people in the neighborhoods that they're from in order to cater to the business interests of a small percentage of people, many of whom do not reside in the city.
Thank you. What is to prevent somebody that, say, has a company, and say the sole purpose of this company is to have short-term rental units? What is to prevent them from putting a permit in every single employee's name and thus still having dozens upon dozens of units?
So we discussed that kind of at length, and I think part of what the deterrent will be there is that person's going to be responsible for what goes wrong with it. That person's going to be the one paying fines. So if you want your employees to, be paying fines, or if you're an employee and you're comfortable with, your name being, thrown in the news if there's a problem, or you being the one who has to show up at court, you being the one who has to ultimately be responsible for the fine, I don't think we're ever going to get around all of the various end arounds that people may try to use, but I think people get it's different when it's in your name personally than it is with an LLC, because you don't have those same protections under the law. It is you personally, and that means if there's a problem, someone can go after you personally.
I would like to see additional protections against people that really do go out of their way to go around the laws that we put in place. Removing the unit from short-term rental is probably not the only penalty there should be, and that the whole problem is that they're putting that unit up when they shouldn't be. So I'd like to see financial and maybe even steepening financial penalties if we find that someone's a repeat offender. Because I think a lot of the problem properties we see in the cities, do belong to these owners who do not really care for the law in any way. And we can't just make laws for the people who obey them. We need to make laws that will actually tamp down on these behaviors that we're really trying to deter in the first place.
I agree with you very much there, and I'd certainly be open to any sort of amendment there. I do think one thing of note, though, is a lot of the problem owners that we see are people who do not live here locally. And I believe that having to come down to City Hall and register your short-term rental is an additional hurdle to that. It's not the end-all be-all, but I think that unlike where it is currently, where things are owned by an LLC, you're sitting in Des Moines, Iowa, and you're on your computer listing short-term rentals in the city. I think having to be there for the inspections, having to, additionally, under this legislation, there'll have to be a person who's available 24/7 for any problems that arise. So if there is a party there, there's someone who we can immediately get a hold of. I think that some of those protections are going to encourage people to either get right or to maybe move their short-term rentals elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to reserve the rest of my questions for after the full presentation.
Absolutely.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Chairman Cohn. I just had a couple of broad questions for you, Alderman Narayan. Can you talk about briefly, or kind of broadly speaking, comparison to other cities? You mentioned kind of being late to the game and then kind of giving us an advantage. I know there's a broad spectrum of ways in which cities regulate short-term rentals. Can you talk a little bit about the cities that we modeled with, that we avoided, and aspects of the bill that are currently incorporated into this one, and other cities that are similar?
Sure. So I think Kansas City right now is on their second or third iteration of short-term rental regulation. One of the things that they've sought to do that I know some of our colleagues are interested in, and I think is worth worth some discussion, is to limit the density of short-term rentals in what would be RA zoning, single-family residential. I think that is probably the biggest concern that I've heard coming from our constituencies. But we also see some jurisdictions limit a total cap. Some say there's a cap per neighborhood. One of the problems that we discussed with some of that is that creates a serious early mover advantage when you cap it. And just because you're there first doesn't mean that you're a good operator. And so we could have current bad operators get in first in the door, and then they have almost a monopoly on those listings because good operators can't come behind them. So we would have to wait until we actually pulled their permits, and then new slots would open up. But I'm certainly not a landlord, but given the nature of those investments, I think it's a tricky play to buy somewhere that you think may open up and then wait for it to open up with those caps in place. I think that the density caps make more sense to me than the overall caps. when we're just talking about what the concerns of the neighbors are, because I do think just in the name of, commerce, that it's good to have competition, and that good operators who are both good with the people who are renting their particular units and staying within the regulatory confines of the city are going to rise to the top there. As I noted earlier, we have seen some places that have done outright bans, and those have tended to not work well, particularly if they're a jurisdiction of any type of size. Some smaller jurisdictions have gotten away with it, but I think that's basically due to the cost of litigating from the platform's perspective. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend thousands and thousands of dollars litigating something over 2 listings. Do you have any more specific questions?
So I, broadly was looking at how many cities, other, the ordinances from other cities. So Kansas, we've looked at Kansas City. What other cities have you incorporated, their regulatory kind of general process? There's a whole lot of ways you can do this, from regulate, kind of coming at the individual property owners to holding the platforms themselves accountable, and a lot of different kind of underlying structures to regulating short-term rentals. And I'm just looking for kind of a broad stroke on how many cities in particular we modeled this after, that we avoided, that we saw problems in, et cetera.
Sure. I would defer to Sarah Baker from the mayor's office on that, just since this legislation had been kind of being dealt with for years before I got on it. I know that's when a lot of the comparative work took place, but I believe Sarah is able to answer that question.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for the general public, just I know there's a lot of discussion about kind of the underlying structure of, how we're regulating it. The other questions I have are related to timeline, and so you mentioned that, even though there's been a large number of years of work done prior to where we are right now, this is a starting point. If you could help kind of just set the, stage for, what we're expecting and what we're looking for as far as, getting something done before summer break, or, how soon can we expect, or are we looking to, or maybe as a goalpost, to getting something completed? I
don't anticipate this getting through the Board of Aldermen before summer break. I think that we're in the middle right now. We're certainly not at the beginning, but I think it took a long time to create a framework that we thought threaded the needle between the residents of the city, short-term rental operators, and the platforms themselves. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and this is our first bite at the apple. I anticipate, even assuming this passes, I anticipate the need for myself or someone else to come back in the future and say, this worked, this didn't work, this worked, this didn't work. I think that a huge portion of what we're trying to do right now is get as much feedback from the residents of the city as we can, to incorporate all that. And so I don't want to rush that work. I'd rather slow it down and get it as right as we can on our first bite at the apple. Additionally, in the legislation itself, in order to build up with what the building division is going to need to enforce things, and that the platforms are going to need to enforce things, and then to give good faith operators time to wrap their heads around this legislation, it will go into effect 1 year after the date of the mayor's signature. That is a timeline that we were tinkering with. We've debated going down to 6 months, but there are needs of various city departments. This is not something that, if we got this to the mayor's desk today, it's not something that could be enforced tomorrow. There are things that need to be built up.
Thank you for that. That is all for my broad questions, Mr. Chairman. I think I have a series of more specific questions, but more appropriate once we've gone through the full presentation.
Sure.
Since we've heard from questions of the committee, I know we have a couple other alder people in the room. I will entertain any questions that they might have, if they have any. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Alderman Volmer. I think Alderman Oldenburg is behind Alderman Volmer. No, none at this time. Okay, great. With that, Ms. Baker, Mr. Oswald, Mr. Dauphin, if you could make your way up and share your perspective. Also, I would like to add, we had a pretty thorough presentation that was provided during the Planning Commission. I would like to have that type of information shared with the committee as a whole. There was a lot of background information with respect to the development of the bill, some data points that I think would be very helpful with respect to where STRs are currently at with it. Thank you. There you go. But I don't think the public can see an 8x12 piece of paper. So perhaps for our next committee hearing, if we could have a more robust presentation, I would certainly appreciate that. But Ms. Baker?
Thank you, Chairman Cohn. Just to clarify, would you like the planning department to come and do that presentation
I think
again?
that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I mean, just having sat through that on the Planning Commission, I mean, they definitely did their homework, and I think it was a valuable conversation. So I think for the next committee hearing, and maybe we just have that as the next committee hearing as the presentation from the Planning Department. But if you could share what you have available today, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
So my name's Sarah Baker. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff to
And
Mayor
I'm going to
Jones.
ask you to speak into the microphone, please. So
I didn't know if I moved it, if it would rebel, so. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Baker. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Jones. Thank you for taking the time to hear this legislation on short-term rental today. I did bring with me copies of a map that shows the distribution of short-term rentals around the city. We're also working on a map for you that will be done by ward, so you can see specific to your ward where the concentration of short-term rentals are, and I'm happy to hand this out as soon as I'm done speaking. The Planning Commission did a presentation on the zoning bill, and that comes with an accompanying PowerPoint. We can certainly make that available and certainly have planning come before this committee as well. With short-term rentals, I just wanted to address some of the questions that have been posed. So Alderwoman Spencer, you asked about where did we look for this legislation. The first place we were looking was the legislation out of Atlanta, but our legislation has changed substantially since that initial model of legislation. We also looked at the National League of Cities report, which surveyed 60 different ordinances throughout the country, and they have a built-in dashboard as well that can show some of the regulations across the country if you're interested there. We also had the City Councilor's Office look specifically across Missouri for the different types of regulations that we see in Springfield, in Columbia, in Kansas City, in Crestwood, and Ladue, and then also try to triage that for how we might look to the City of St. Louis and bringing those regulations forward. I cannot say there is one model city that we drew this from, because each city has run into their own challenges when it comes to regulating short-term rentals, and of course, St. Louis is unique as well in bringing that on. So it is a hodgepodge of those pieces of legislation, but I'm happy to point to the NLC report if that is helpful for folks to dig into. I also wanted to share one of the reasons that we're ready and eager to regulate short-term rentals really has to do with the public safety implications that short-term rentals pose. The St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department put together a short report for us on some of the instances they've had at short-term rentals recently. I think many of you are aware of the shooting incidents that might have happened in your ward. There are also instances with large parties that have occurred and had to be broken up. There are instances with individuals who became intoxicated and jumped from buildings because of being at a short-term rental party. So those sorts of things are what are top of our mind when we think about regulating short-term rentals and making sure that this fully benefits the welfare of the city of St. Louis. So with that, I'm not going to belabor anything. I'm happy to take your questions, and I will pass out this map.
Madam Clerk, will you please take copies of the map and distribute them to the committee and other alderpersons in the room? I'll go ahead and probably Commissioner Oswald and Mr. Dauphin, have them speak as well, and then any questions that kind of arise from the conversation here, I'll have the committee ask those questions. Do you have anything further that you'd like to add?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add was that, you know, we have this timeline of 1 year. We're certainly going to try to do that as fast as possible. A lot of this is technical stuff, IT stuff that we need, you know, a platform all built out and stuff like that. One of the things I was going to talk to the sponsor about is possibly changing the language of the 1 year to say something like as soon as operational systems are available. Other than that, you know, I would again stress the need for this type of bill. I think this has become a real problem in a lot of neighborhoods throughout our community, and you know, I urge you to pass this eventually here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dauphin. And since this is your first time, would you mind introducing
morning.
yourself?
Thank you. My name is Michael Dauphin. I'm the city assessor. I thank you for having me. To the extent that the assessor's office plays a role in this conversation, we've been involved in the conversation for years now, and there, as Alderman Narayan has pointed out, this has been kicked around and kind of massaged for a long time now. I think that they have put forth a pretty good effort to address the needs that we are kind of experiencing here in the city of St. Louis. So for the assessor's office purposes, we've been kind of responsible with identifying these Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and when we find that they're full-time short-term rentals that are non-owner occupied, we change the classification, the taxing classification from residential to commercial. And what that means for a property owner is it basically doubles their tax bill. They're taxed at about 19% as residential. When we move it over to commercial, it goes to 33 or 32%. And then there's a commercial surcharge that's included. So it about doubles their taxes. So one way we've been able to get the attention of these owners is by moving the ones that are full-time short-term rentals to commercial. And you know, it's kind of put the onus on them to say, okay, well, is it worth us to continue operating this business knowing that the taxes are going to be more than what we originally bargained for? So we think it's been productive. You know, the biggest component that's been discussed today that is what Commissioner Oswald has addressed, and that is these third-party vendors that will identify all these properties. That would be huge for us. Currently, the way we identify these is I have one person in my office who's going through all these platforms and Google Maps and trying to identify them, just running blind and just sleuthing the internet. And we've been successful doing it, but successful only to the extent that I couldn't tell you how many, I mean, what percentage we've identified that are active today versus what we have on our books. I wouldn't, it's not nearly the amount that are active right now, the ones that we have on our books. So this would be huge first step to have all of these identified, and it would keep them kind of up and on the up and up to encourage them and require them to register these and notify the city that they're operating these businesses.
Great, thank you. We'll take questions from the committee with respect to the testimony that was just shared by Mr. Oswald, Ms. Baker, and Mr. Dauphin. Vice Chair Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some specific questions related to the legislation itself. Do we want to get into that right now?
Sure. We have the sponsor available.
Is this about the best time? Can we talk a little, thank you, Alderman Narayan, and, you know, thank you to everyone for coming, you know, to present this today. The bookings on, like, platforms, can we talk a little bit about the platforms and what we're doing to regulate them, you know, and holding the platforms themselves accountable as far as permitting the platform? You know, these platforms are making a ton of money, facilitating the availability of our housing units. And, you know, I think that in order for them to operate here in St. Louis and not be banned, they ought to be held accountable for policing and patrolling at least a little bit, you know, the folks that they are contracting with to rent spaces. Do we have, one thing I kind of, you can use the sort of well-known Airbnb, VRBO, and then there's all these off-market ways in which you can engage in a short-term rental. And I'm looking for some kind of broad, understanding of what we're doing to hold those platforms accountable, and what we're doing to kind of rein them in and hold their feet to the fire as far as a participant in the process.
So my understanding from what we've been doing for the most part, these operators that I've spoken with, and that at this point it's mostly the larger operators that I've spoken with, they want to, they've actively worked with us on some of this legislation. They want these regulations in place. They don't want to operate kind of in the Wild West like they are now. And so what we've looked at doing is, through the permitting process, the city will have a database, basically, of these valid short-term rental permits. Now, before you can list on the various platforms, you'll have to show this permit number, and they'll have a way to validate that permit number. And so if they don't have an interest in, at least from my discussions with them, they don't have an interest in listing properties that are not permitted through the city. And so where that lands us is...
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? They do or do not have?
They do not have an interest in listing properties that are not permitted through the city, should we have this regulatory framework in place. They want to ensure that each of their listings complies with our regulatory framework.
And while do they have an obligation to ensure that they have a permit, a non-revoked permit, and do they have repercussions if they fail in their interest in ensuring they have a permit?
So I think like many things with big tech, that the motto with a lot of these is go fast and break things. And what that ends up doing with regulatory framework in general is oftentimes it ends up in a courtroom. And we're trying to avoid that because it's very expensive, very time consuming. For example, the city of New York opted to ban short-term rentals 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. As of today, you can still jump on Airbnb or Vrbo and get an apartment for rent in New York, and they've spent thousands and thousands of dollars litigating it in the meantime. I think it's more prudent to get voluntary compliance with the various platforms and have them say, hey, we're good faith actors. We realize there's a lot of money to be made here, and we want to follow these rules. And if they're not following those rules, then I think you start looking at, litigation as a fix for that. But I'm very hesitant to start off on a footing where we say, hey, let's tee up litigation with big tech companies.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we tee up legislation to, get into a legal argument, but I'm curious, with regards to the permitting process, are the platforms required to have a permit with the city of St. Louis under the current legislation?
They are not, I don't believe that they are required to, but I think we may also run into various interstate commerce issues, the constitutional issues by requiring that. I would want to defer to a better lawyer than me.
Well, I know other cities have required such a permit from platforms. New Orleans, for example, has legislation that requires such a permit. And they hold the platforms themselves, their feet to the fire, and they require that the platforms not only provide, have a permit with the city, but that they, have some safeguards in place, to make sure that they're licensed and accredited, so that you start to weed out some of the bad platform actors that are allowing people to just come in. You may fail on one platform and go to the other, if you're a bad actor. And so, I'm wanting to hold as many participants' feet to the fire as possible, because while Airbnb and VRBO and these platforms and short-term rentals in a general sense, as we can see by this map, does introduce visitors to neighborhoods that don't have hotels. It does provide a way to, to engage in our city in a very meaningful, neighborhood-oriented way, which is arguably one of the best ways to get to know a city like St. Louis, which has incredible neighborhoods. But on the other hand, I don't believe that currently Airbnb has been, or these platforms have been acting in the best interest in our city in a general sense, just recognizing the large number of problems we're having. And so I think, they have the tools within their own IT platform to hold their customers' feet to the fire, and they're failing to do it on their own. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a regulatory body to force them to, or ask them to leave.
And
even though you can still get an Airbnb in New York, you certainly can't get one as easily as you could if they weren't engaged. And I would argue it's costing our city so much money to fail to regulate them on a regular daily basis almost, not just in sheer cost and policing, but just in, general well-being.
If I could interject real quick, I am mistaken. I was thinking of a previous version of this. There actually is a permit required on page 16, line 4.
Okay. So that is page 16. Are we looking at the?
That's Board Bill 33, page 16, line 4. It starts off a permit required. A permit will be required. So yeah, that's my mistake. I apologize for that.
I'm looking at the online version of the bill. So you're saying it's on page 16?
Page 16, line 4.
I'm looking at both of these. Okay, and so
And so the building commissioner will lay out the requirements for that permit.
okay, and that is for the intermediary and a rental platform.
Yeah, so that's for the
Okay.
platform itself. That's a permit for the platform to
Okay,
engage in.
And what is,
business.
and if the permit is required for a platform to operate in the city of St. Louis, is that right then, Mr. Commissioner? Yes, okay. What is the cost of that permit? I'm sorry, I didn't see that in the, do we have the cost of these permits outlined? No,
I don't believe so.
okay. And do we have the requirements for the permit and the
bel-
revocation of the permits?
So the revocation, yes, and I believe the building commissioner is working on the requirements, because I believe that we've tried to leave that a little bit broad to ensure that as things ebb and flow and change the way that they do with these platforms. One of the reasons why it's taken so long to bring this legislation in the first place is as soon as we think we have an issue nailed down, it changes. So we wanted to leave some things in the building commissioner's discretion, so as things change moving forward, that permit can also change some. And we do need to be cautious about the permitting fees so that we don't run afoul of Hancock. I know that that's like the magic word that everyone says to try and stall legislation out in its tracks. And I'm certainly not trying to stall my own legislation,
Yeah.
but that's something that I think that we do need to just be aware of to make sure we don't run afoul of it.
Sure. Do we have, so this is very helpful. I think that outlining the revocation, the policies, even though, broadly speaking, to give some purview to our building commissioner would be very helpful, especially to assure the general public that, there is some real meat here, and that we do plan to revoke permits and if these actors aren't, playing ball. The exemptions to owner-occupied units. Can you talk a little bit about that? I have some concerns. I see a lot of, for lack of a better word, fraud involved in describing a unit as owner-occupied. in our assessor's database, you know, and I'm looking at who owns a property and that sort of thing, you know, especially when I've got a bad landlord or a neglectful property owner, and they state that it's owner occupied. Their owner address is the same as that address, and it's clearly not the case. No one is living in that unit. So can we talk a little bit about the exemption there? I have some concerns about the abuse of that.
Sure. So through discussions at this point, one of the tools that I think we'll be using to enforce that will be earnings tax receipts. You can only qualify as owner occupied if that's where you've paid your earnings tax. You're only going to be paying your earnings tax at one place. So if that's where you live, then that's where you'll be paying your earnings tax from. If you want to pay earnings tax in several places, I guess that's a different discussion. But I share your concerns about fraud there, and that's kind of what we've come up with as far as something that may work to police some of that, because we don't want to punish, the nice old woman renting a room in her house to make ends meet. That's not what this legislation is designed to do. We're trying to curtail party houses and to keep starter homes and affordable housing on the market. We're not seeing the same issues with people who rent a room of a house that they currently live in. We're just not seeing the big parties there. We're not seeing the problems. I know that from my neighborhood, there's several people I personally know who do that, and a lot of times they're catering to traveling nurses, given the proximity of my ward to the various hospitals. And, you know, traveling nurses are not known to be a terribly rowdy bunch. And so I don't want to punish people who are just trying to make ends meet, who may be on a fixed income. They may have, you know, the family house that the kids aren't living in anymore. But I do want to make sure that we're holding people's feet to the fire when it comes to party houses. I know the alderman from the Hill, I'm blanking on numbers right now, 5. Yeah, the alderman from the 5th has some Airbnbs or some short-term rentals, I should say, in his ward that are known as, you know, the listing is under like the Jam House or something like that. It's very clear that it's for throwing parties, and that's not what we should be allowing.
Okay. Thank you. Can you point me to where that is in the current legislation? Where that,
Where what is?
well, let's see. I guess the exemption, the owner occupied,
It's page 3, line 18, D, short-term rental, non-occupied means a short-term rental unit not used as a principal resident by either the owner or the tenant/lessee authorized by the owner for short-term rentals.
sorry, no, the part where we're requiring proof of owner occupied to be submitting an earnings tax receipt.
Oh, I think that's part of something that we're still absolutely, that's part of the work in progress here.
Okay, so that part will be added to the legislation.
Yeah.
The requirement of a submission of either a tax payment receipt or, at least filing something with the collector of revenue stating a residence.
Yeah, and that's something that we've been working on to try and figure out what the best way to police that is going to be, because we know that there's a incentive to say, hey, I live in all of these places that I rent out, but we're saying you only get one, and we're figuring out how best to police that, and the current idea is that income tax.
Speaking of earnings tax, are we collecting earnings tax on these? I suppose that's a taxing question, but is there an earnings tax component to the renting of Airbnbs as a source of income?
I think that
The earnings tax is for W-2 wages. It's not, these are not considered W-2 wages, so they would not be reported on an earnings tax.
There is some work associated with running these, but that's a separate taxing question. Okay. And then lastly, just on policies that we're requiring, one thing we've seen a scary number of is incidents with guns in Airbnbs.
Absolutely.
Is there any requirement that guns not be allowed inside Airbnbs, or is there any consideration for any policies related to drugs, guns, or other things from the platform required of the renter, the person renting the unit?
To be honest, I have not considered that. I'd be happy to have discussions about that. I don't know, pardon the pun, I don't want to shoot from the hip on it and just give an answer here, because I don't know the legal implications of saying you cannot have a gun here, because so much of this is laid out in lodging law is a massive body of
Sure.
law. Drugs, certainly
sure,
you're not allowed to
yeah.
have drugs.
I mean, I just think, outlining some policies like this, I mean, I realize that there are some legal ramifications. I would argue that the legal ramifications and the cost of failing to try some of these things, I mean, we're just seeing the violence associated with so many of these Airbnbs is just truly horrifying and just costing our city so much.
Sure.
So
And I think we would also, have to have a real discussion about what enforcement of that may look
Sure.
like, because I don't want to create a framework where you rent a short-term rental and someone comes through and, looks at all your stuff.
Yeah, and maybe there's, I don't know what it looks like, a zero tolerance policy on guns inside of an Airbnb or anything like that.
Yeah, but I'm happy to continue that discussion, though, certainly.
Mr. Chairman, I have probably 100 more questions like this, but in the interest of time and recognizing that clearly there's still a lot of work that's going to be continue to be done on it, I'll defer right now to the general public who's shown up to ask their own to weigh in themselves.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderwoman Velasquez, do you have any?
I think we circled back to me.
No, that was the last round. We had Ms. Baker, Mr. Dauphin, and Mr. Oswald speak, and now we're going through questions again.
No, I think, as Vice Chair Spencer said, in the interest of time, I'd like to use this moment to hear from the public and all the folks who came here to weigh in.
Great. Is that the general consensus? Great, I appreciate that. I'm sure the public does as well. So with that, we'll get into the,
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alderman, appreciate it. We'll get into the public hearing component of this morning's hearing. We do have several speakers that have signed up in support and opposition and undecided. Since this is a legal proceeding, we do ask that folks swear in before giving testimony before the board. So I will ask each of you when you come to the podium to please affirm that you're telling the truth. The reason we do so is that this is a legal hearing and we expect people to be honest before this legislative body. So I will start I think that's ridiculous when people do group swearing in. Oh, no, sorry, Alderwoman. So we'll start with, in support, Karen Carabell. Sorry. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Everyone has 3 minutes. You don't have to take the whole 3 minutes either. if
Yeah,
you don't
I hope
choose
I
to.
won't. And I apologize, I have a prior commitment that's waiting on me, and I need to leave as soon as I'm done. I'm Karen Carabell. I'm managing partner of SF Shannon Real Estate Management, LLC. I'm here with my business partner, Rachel Presley. Before I start, a mystery is solved. So our assessment notices this year, our reassessment notices, usually we manage 10 buildings in the city of St. Louis, all in the city. Our business is 100% city-based. Our largest is 100 units. Our smallest is a 2-family way down south near Carondelet Park. We usually get our pile of reassessments in one day, and we still don't have them all. I think we've gotten 6 of the 10. But I realized now a mystery was solved today. We already pay $160,000 a year in property taxes, and it looks like it's going up to $250,000, maybe $300,000 in the next cycle. So we will be filing an appeal. That's on my list today. I only wish that we made as much money as the city thinks we make. I wish that, but of course that's not why we're here today. We started in the vacation rental business in 2007. This was before anyone knew what a vacation rental was. We came to this from the bed and breakfast world. Our first place was licensed as a bed and breakfast. We have 21 vacation rentals. They are in our apartment buildings. The first one, we exhibit total transparency. We have 419 apartments. We own what we manage. We're like the owner-operators of this industry. We let all of our long-term residents know exactly what we do. In our long-term rental applications, we tell them, you are not allowed to do this. They must sign in their contract that they're not allowed to sublet their places as short-term rentals. The 21 vacation rentals represent, most of our apartments are studios with a limit of 2 people, and we are 100% transparent. We're hiding in plain view. We have been the whole time. The 21 vacation rental units represent 4% of our current inventory and well over 10% of our gross revenue. It is, there is a lot of money in that business, but there's a reason for that. There's a lot more work. Our vacation rentals, the reason we got into it, we're very blessed. We have magnificent historic buildings in parts of St. Louis where people want to play. We have a building in the heart of the Central West End at McPherson and Euclid. We have our 100-unit building. You can walk to the City Foundry. We have vacation rentals in a building across the street from Tower Grove Park. The locations from where people see our city, it showcases our city. We are the good news. We are the vast majority of landlords that you never hear about because
time is
time is up.
Past.
Okay. So then I'll stop. I just want to point out that in 2022 we hosted 1,200 guest units that generated $50,000 in lodging taxes for the city and state. And if this legislation, which I really like this legislation, I think it's terrific, except it would put us out of business if it stands, and we'll have to probably lay off 5 of our 13 employees. So I finally want to...
You can submit any additional
I
testimony
do. I want to invite you, any of you, at no charge to stay with us.
I don't believe we can, I don't believe we're able to do that.
That's okay. You can, that's okay.
I appreciate the offer.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, she provided additional information. Would you mind grabbing that for the committee and for the record? And again, anyone who is unfortunately unable to provide further testimony beyond the 3-minute limit, you are able to submit that to the clerk in writing via email, and it will be added to the hearing folder for the committee to review. So thank you, Ms. Carabell. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Carrie Wojciechowski, my apologies. Are you related to Paul at all?
No.
Okay. Sorry, St. Louis question. You may proceed. Oh, do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I am here on behalf of a friend of mine. Our biggest concern is the loopholes that people will be able to jump through with this legislation. I am not in support of it as it stands, as it is extremely lenient, in my opinion. This, for example, is a house on Jameson. This was rented out. It's actually a long-term rental. It allows FedEx drivers to come and stay and shower and eat. So the people there are really short-term people, but it is a business that's not subject to any type of business regulations. I would like to see, again, you know, as you can see, that is an extreme problem. It has been declared a nuisance property. Neighbors have called in on this property numerous times. I would like to see stricter restrictions as far as nuisance properties in terms of short-term rentals. I know it can take years to get a nuisance property cleaned up. And if a short-term rental, they need to have more of a one strike, you're out kind of a thing. So in the case of if there's guns, there's drugs, there's parties, in terms of a city property, that could, again, take years. Those need to be limited. I want to ask why these are businesses. Airbnbs, they are businesses. Why are they being allowed to operate in residentially zoned areas? That is another concern of mine. We really need to regulate these short-term rentals quite a bit more. Look at some of your neighborhood associations that have provided statements about short-term rentals. For example, the St. Louis Hills Neighborhood Association, as well as the Lindenwood Park Neighborhood Association, have basically such strict restrictions on short-term rentals to where they do not exist. For example, St. Louis Hills requires a minimum short-term rental of 40 consecutive days. At least that is the statement, the official statement by their neighborhood association. I would like to see more owner-occupied short-term rentals, along with, of course, restrictions there that actually requires that they be owner-occupied. For example, a 6-month requirement that they be occupied and a limit of the number of days that they can stay. And could you please, Mr. Chairman, provide us with the email address of the clerk so that we can send in that additional information?
I would be happy to. I believe it's clerk@BOA, or no. Hold on. Going to email him myself so I can pull it up. BOA clerk@STLOUIS-mo.gov. Again, that's BOA, as in Board of Aldermen, clerk, no period, no space, no hyphen, no dash, at stlouis-mo.gov. Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. Next on the list is Tracy Graneman. Good morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do. Can you hear me okay?
Can you speak into the micro, or raise, you can raise the microphone up a little bit. Thank
Rarely
you.
do I raise it. It's so exciting. Okay. I am the president of the Skinker to Bolivar Community Council Board of Directors, and I'm representing Skinker to Bolivar community. Because of the 3-minute, I'm going to start with our recommendations, and then I'll follow with context to where our recommendations are coming from. Regarding BB 33, we absolutely support the establishment of a permit office as soon as possible. We request a moratorium on new short-term rentals until such time that a permit office is established, funded, staffed, and all permit requests for existing STRs are resolved. We encourage the permitting process be multifaceted to ensure that STRs are regularly inspected, taxed appropriately, and safety standards are strictly enforced to protect the owner, tenants, and neighbors. I highlight in Skinker to Bolivar, we have a lot of students. They need to be protected as well. And some of the issues that Alderwoman Spencer was talking about. We support a significant financial penalty for any property owner who lists an STR that's not permitted or is a problem property. Finally, we encourage the establishment of a permit process that enables neighborhood review of new permit requests prior to approval, and also enables an appeal process should an issue arise. It can provide an additional level of oversight as to whether things are owner-occupied, which we're getting to. Regarding 34, in areas zoned residential, we support a complete prohibition of short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied. The board is divided, to be honest, on whether to allow owner-occupied short-term rentals. Should owner-occupied short-term rentals be allowed, we do want to clarify we're defining owner-occupied if it's a duplex and you're attached on the same property that meets our concerns up to, we believe it's up to 6 units in a space. We do have serious concerns either way about the city being able to monitor and control these. So whatever restrictions go in, we want to make sure the maximum amount of attention and funding is given. Our primary concern is around zoning. As already discussed, STRs are commercial entities, and they should not be allowed in residential areas. It not only opens the door for other commercial entities, but it goes against existing zoning. Non-owner occupied STRs convert existing housing used by homeowners and long-term tenants, depriving neighborhoods of our valuable assets, which is our community. They create a drain on neighborhood and city resources, everything from common resources, trash, and parking. And one of the major concerns is the risk of long-term vacancies in buildings. That doesn't help our neighborhood density, nor does it help our security. In addition to that, the undue strain on law enforcement due to nuisance complaints and crime. However, we recognize that STRs have some potential impact in a positive way to our communities. If properly regulated and owner-occupied only, they may represent a business tax stream to the city. They can be a path to home ownership for some people, where you can have an additional stream of revenue, and also where we're located in Skinker to Bolivar, it can help support people attending local events on the Loop, WashU graduation, events in Forest Park, and other neighborhood or community activities.
You're at time.
Thank you. I didn't say
Of course, Ms. Granneman. And again, I think you've actually already submitted. I thought I saw an email from the Skinker to Bolivar Neighborhood Association. Okay. Well, you're more than welcome to submit the testimony. My apologies for the 3-minute time limit, but we do have well over 20 people who have signed up to testify. So, just 3 minutes each takes us over an hour of testimony alone. So trying to be respectful of everyone's time this morning. So I do appreciate the comments, and again, thank you for being here today. Next on the list is Dalton Riggins.
Good morning.
Good morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Great. You may proceed.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me today. My name is Dalton Riggins. I currently have 27 active listings here in the St. Louis market over the last couple of years. My concern isn't regulation in and of itself. I think regulation is needed. I primarily believe registration could be a big asset to this whole process. Listening to some of the different testimonies, it sounds like there's a lot of concerns about how to enforce and how to carry out some of these other processes. So in the name of simplicity, simply by having all short-term rentals register via a permit process, whatever it might be, and weeding out the bad actors, I think a lot of things truly take care of themselves. If I were to venture a guess, I think a lot of the people who showed up here today are probably not those bad actors. They're here because we probably all, by and large, believe in this regulation because we don't want to put ourselves out of business, and we're going to be the ones that continue to follow the rules and not raise a fuss in our communities anyway. From my standpoint and my experience, a lot of our issues resolve really about the bad hosts and the bad guests. One of my recommendations here at the end is that I think equal energy should be put into pursuing these guests that are causing issues in our communities, because again, in my experience, many of them, almost all of them are local. The issue is there are local residents who are booking Airbnbs, Verbos, whatever it might be. And in a lot of cases, there's actually frauding hosts. We had a recent incident where we had a 50-year-old woman who booked, and over 12, 14 underage kids showed up, and we immediately booted them out. That is a case for a lot of good hosts and how we respond, or the SCR agents as proposed. But there are not many things that a host can do in that case to prevent it before it happens, but they can be reactive. There are a lot of red flags that hosts can be on the lookout for. So another proposition that I would make would be during this permitting process, potentially considering a class or a video or something short and free when going through that permit process to educate hosts on what to look out for: last-minute bookings, weekend bookings, under 25, local residents, collecting IDs, higher deposits. There's all kinds of things, cameras, noise detection devices that you can use to be a great host, as we've been for the last couple of years. I think the limit on permits is not something that any host will really be very excited about. I think at the end of the day, if someone can run 30, 40, 50 successful, problem-free short-term rentals, there's no reason to limit them. What we're really truly trying to limit here are the bad hosts, the bad actors, the bad guests, the crime, which no good host wants in the first place. Is that my time?
It is.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Next on the list is Mr. David Stokes. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
may
Mr.
proceed.
Chairman. My name is David Stokes. I'm Director of Municipal Policy at the Show Me Institute, Missouri's free market think tank. I'm here representing on behalf of my colleague, Avery Frank, who's been the one studying this issue for us. But he is doing his civic duty, jury duty across the street this morning, so that's why I'm here on his behalf. We are here in support of this bill. We think this bill, as currently proposed, does a nice job of targeting necessary regulations to the very real problem of general mayhem that we all read about all the time in some of these problem properties downtown and elsewhere. And I think it's properly targeted at, I'm not trying not to pop my peas here into the mic, properly targeted at the non-owner occupied units, and I don't think the regulations are even too heavy on them. So we think this is a good bill. And I don't say that about a lot of new regulations, but I think this bill does a very nice job of addressing the need in an even-handed way to allow short-term rentals to continue where appropriate, but also to regulate them in a way to allow the city to deal with the very legitimate issues that they're raising in parts of the city. So beyond that, I'm not going to go on longer. We've submitted written testimony. I believe you have all of it. Thank you for that. I just want to say that I did have a conversation the other night with a state representative who was the one who wrote the bill, which is now revised statute 71990, which I would hope you're familiar with. This was about the issue of short-term rentals in general, not specific to the St. Louis bill. And he raised the fact that there are certainly 71990 is a state statute that does not deal with the non-owner occupied parts of it. It only deals with the owner occupied parts. And here we think that this bill also does a nice job of exempting, or at most modest regulations on non-owner occupied, on owner occupied properties. But as the bill sponsor said, none of this is set in stone. So we just want to say that as you debate perhaps regulations on owner-occupied properties, that a revised statute 71990, which would prohibit many cities from going too far. And I think there are cities in this state passing it who are oblivious to this regulation, such as St. Charles, the city, passing a blanket moratorium on them is almost certainly in violation of that statute. And I know you're not proposing to do that here. I'm just saying that's a statute to please keep in mind as you consider the owner-occupied aspects of it. And generally speaking, I know my time is almost up. Happy to take any questions. And again, think that this bill, as currently proposed, is a is an effectively done proposal for the city of St. Louis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right on time. So I will add, if members of the committee have any questions for our speakers, feel free to ask those at the time that they're up. You know, I'll give some latitude here. You don't need to be recognized to ask questions. So I'm not going to go through roll call after every one of these folks. So feel free. Next on the list, Miles Strickland. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
I am a 31-year resident of North St. Louis and a lifelong resident of the city of St. Louis. I own 4 rental properties, and one's been operating as an Airbnb, which unfortunately I started up right before COVID. And the success of my property, which is in North St. Louis, north of Delmore, you might find me as one of 2 spots on that map, because there's only one thing attractive about staying in North St. Louis, and that's its proximity to access to other places you may want to visit in the city of St. Louis. My property succeeds because of reviews from guests. There's a rating system that goes both ways. The tenant that stays there gets reviewed by the owner, and the owner reviews the tenant. And I've had nothing but 4.8 star rating of a 5-point system. And that is because I have to go beyond the norm. I sympathize with what these people are dealing with in the Hill area or in the Grove area. But over in North St. Louis, our problems are different. If we could get more individuals to take pride in our area, I am also my block captain over there. I own 3 properties in my neighborhood. If we could get more individuals to take pride in the area to purchase properties and even use them in this capacity, we may be able to overcome the problems in North St. Louis. I am not opposed to regulation. I just want to make sure that it's understood as to how this can impact others. As the gentleman stepped up here and stood before you and told you that going from residential to commercial increased it 100%, he felt very comfortable in stating how it increased my taxes on my property 100%. But what do I get for that increase? Because all regulation means nothing if there's no way to enforce it. I'm in North City where there's no traffic enforcement. I mean, we have traffic laws. There's no code enforcement. We have properties that are falling down around us. So I welcome regulation, but I also wanted you to understand where some of us stand as far as our commitment to this. I rent under VRBO, and I'm been pretty successful with that. I've been to eviction court in the 12 years I've had in rental property 3 times. That's not a win situation for a property owner at any level. So this has been pretty lucrative for me as far as me and my wife being able to sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. Next on the list is Joshua Lawrence, Ward 1 resident.
Yeah, now. Sorry, buddy.
Just had to rub it in.
Exactly. Hey, look, it's only been 2 weeks. Hold up.
Morning. Do you affirm to,
5-2.
I think you should be able to, there you go. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
Yeah, for sure.
Great. You may proceed.
Yeah. Hey, folks, my name's Joshua Lawrence. I use he, him, his. As Alderman Cohn mentioned, I'm now in the 1st ward for about 2 weeks. Before that, I was in the 20th and 3rd for like 6 years. Yeah, I'm in full support of this. I applaud Alderman Narayan wherever he's at, as well as all the co-sponsors. I don't wake up at 7 a.m. unpaid to come and testify in a room unless it's something important. With that, I want to say that the key to any good propaganda is not about something that doesn't happen, it's emphasis, right? With that, we're not here to hate on the little guy, right? I'm 5'2", I love the little guy, right? As a little guy myself, gotta love him. But as Narayan pointed out, this isn't about owner-occupied, this isn't about empty nesters, listing out a room. This is about places that rent out the entire building, right? With that, the Airbnb, they're not great at putting out the records, right? With other cities that had to do this, they literally had to subpoena to say, hey, how many of these are actually owner-occupied and vice versa. They found that upwards of 60% of them actually are. So these owner-occupied folks, like I said, we're not here to hate on the little guy. Those are not representative of the short-term rental industry as a whole. And these realtors and these outlets don't have incentive to actually tamper down on it, right? Because if they're making money, it is what it is, right? They got valued at what? The same thing as Hyatt when they first started launching, and they didn't even have any of the infrastructure that Hyatt has to do. With that, it's an unregulated hotels, it's unregulated landlords. It's just a massive rezoning across the city of St. Louis, and that leads to evictions. Ever since Airbnb has been around, ever since short-term rentals have been around, we've seen more and more evictions, because if I'm a landlord, I know I can make way more money doing Airbnb and not be beholden to any tenant's rights than if I actually do rent it out to communities and help build neighborhoods around that. I won't run on very long. I do watch so many meetings. Every sentence here is pretty much verb, noun, holistically. And when we talk about working things holistically, it's just securing housing for all. This is just a piece of that pie. I recommend, supporting it all. Thanks.
Thank you. Next on the list, I have Michelle Pona. Morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Great. Thank you. You may proceed.
Hi, my name is Michelle Pona. I live in the Southwest Garden neighborhood. I'm also a board member of our neighborhood association. My husband and I live on South Kings Highway in a beautiful historic home. Today I want to talk to you about what's going on around our house. This map depicts a 500-foot radius around our house, and these are all of the short-term rentals that we have to deal with on a daily basis. These are all historic homes. Our homes are part of the Reber National Historic District, so these homes are all over 3,000 square feet. Within 500 feet of our house, these homes boast that they can sleep up to 73 people. As you know, Kings Highway has no parking. So where do these people park? The home next door to us boasts it can hold 10 people at a time. There's only 2 parking spaces in a garage behind that house, so we are constantly dealing with parking issues. My husband and I want to live in a neighborhood full of neighbors, a neighborhood where neighbors look out for one another. If we leave our garage door open, I want my neighbor to call or text me and let me know. I want our neighbors who see something suspicious to let us know so that we can be on the lookout. We want neighbors to participate in our neighborhood association, and we want a neighborhood full of neighbors, not strangers. Board Bill 33 does not even come close to the stated purpose to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the residents and individuals of the community at large, nor does it protect the integrity of the city's neighborhoods. We are asking for some common sense solutions. What we would like to see is all STRs be owner-occupied if they are in residential neighborhoods like ours. There's no need for us to have 6 short-term rentals that are 3,000 square feet or more within 500 feet of our house. In Kansas City, At the end of May, they just passed legislation banning all STRs that are non-owner occupied in any residential areas. They're not grandfathering in any Airbnb that already has a license. They're letting their license expire, then they have to reapply. And I think that that's something that really needs to be considered, especially in our neighborhood. If we do pass this legislation, there has to be rules so that this can't continue. My husband and I can't live next to this. This has turned our neighborhood into a tourist destination, not a neighborhood. We don't have families. We don't have kids riding their bikes down the street anymore. We have tourists.
Thank you, Ms. Pona. That's time. Very much appreciate your perspective, and thank you for being here this morning.
I had one question for Ms. Pona. You meant that the city that recently banned non-owner that was Kansas City?
City did, yes.
That was when?
May 23rd. The legislation went into effect June 15th.
Okay, thank you,
It's
Ms.
all available online.
Thank you, Ms. Pona. Yeah.
Next on the list is Thomas Lauer. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
First, I would like to echo what the previous speaker just said about her neighborhood in Kings Highway. I'm the president of a small 4-unit condominium association in the historic Shaw neighborhood. I support the effort to impose regulations upon the owners and management companies engaging in the short-term rental business. Yesterday morning, I searched both Airbnb and Vrbo for short-term rental availability for the week of September 17 through the 23rd. I limited my search to the Shaw neighborhood. Airbnb returned approximately 60 different short-term rentals, among them an apartment putting 4 bedrooms with 8 beds to sleep 16 people. 16, and 2 bathrooms. Similar search on Vrbo returned at least 40. One home was advertised as a 4-bedroom that sleeps 14 and has 1 bathroom. Occupancy levels to be determined by the Building Commission is certainly a good thing. About a year and a half ago, my condo association successfully prevented a potential buyer from purchasing a unit for the purpose of operating a short-term rental business. The association learned of the buyer's intentions through her own social media usage, where she said, "This is going to be my venture into real estate investing in my very first Airbnb property." The buyer's intention is not unique. According to data from AirDNA, a firm that keeps track of these things, there are currently 3,357 active short-term rental properties in the city of St. Louis. In the fourth quarter of last year, data shows there was a 38% increase in the supply of short-term rentals in St. Louis compared to the fourth quarter of '21. This committee should explore limiting the number of short-term rentals within a neighborhood and within the city as a whole to a certain percentage of total housing units. A limitation would work to help preserve the quality and integrity of our neighborhoods, as the previous speaker alluded to. The reality is short-term rental is always a business. There's a single-family home right down the street in the same block as the association's condo building. It was recently purchased, renovated, and put on the market as a short-term rental home. It's advertised as 2,500 square feet, a 4-bedroom that sleeps 13. 13. At least it says it has 3.5 bathrooms. It's offered by a firm called Abode Bucks. The company claims to represent over 100 properties. The committee may wish to consider how the proposed legislation will cover and regulate this kind of firm, a firm which is in the business of securing bookings for many investor-owner clients. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like some help? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lauer. Next on the list is Elia Ellis. Morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
Good morning, I do. My first name is Elia
My
Ellis.
apologies.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here and pleased to Alderman Ryan for promoting this bill. I am here in two capacities. One is as the chair of a legislative action committee for a trade association called the Community Associations Institute. That is a national association with a local chapter and a statewide chapter that is involved in promoting issues related to community associations, which are homeowners associations, condominiums, townhome associations, and the like. So I'm very, very pleased to see that we've heard from a number of residential associations already this morning, and those are the types of constituents that we have in our trade association. As an association, as I said, we're trying to promote the interests of those communities, and an overriding public policy that we try to advocate for is to allow these individual private communities, whether it be a condominium in a condominium building or a neighborhood association of single-family homes, to have self-determination on issues like this and decide for themselves whether they want to permit STRs or not, and if so, to what extent and how, and that sort of thing. So that's not an argument for or against the legislation. In general, I think we're very much in favor of regulating this issue, and so we're very glad that you're bringing the bill. Our position is there's probably a number of adjustments and tweaks and additional revising that's needed, and we're happy certainly to participate and offer ideas. Our association, national as it is, has a bunch of research that may be useful. You may have already relied on it. I don't know, but I just want to offer that and let you know that this trade association exists, that we're interested in the issue, we're watching, we'd like to participate, and we want to be able to have well-run, safe communities that have self-determination on this issue. The other capacity is that I'm an attorney in town that specializes in representing condominium and homeowners associations, and happen to have to be represented a lawyer for one of the Washington Avenue condominiums that had a shooting last year and a death that was related to a Airbnb situation and a party that got out of hand. In that particular situation, which I think is sort of instructive of some problems that the legislation needs to attempt to grapple with, is that you had a situation where you had a person owning a unit who rented it to a tenant. The tenant then rented it out to somebody else who had Airbnb. So I don't know if the tenant knew that there was even an Airbnb situation going on. Certainly the unit owner didn't. The condominium association, which already had a ban on Airbnbs in the building as a rule, didn't know about it till after the fact. So a lot of it is very reactionary. And my thought and proposal, which is an imperfect one, is that the more fines that can be associated with violating the legislation will create a situation where that sort of unit owner will make it his or her business to know more about what his tenant is doing. Okay?
Thank you, Elia.
Thank you very much.
Next on the list is Charlie Hendenleiter. Morning. You affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
I'm Charlie Hinderleiter. I represent St. Louis Realtors. We appreciate the bill sponsor and the committee chair for already having some good discussion. We look forward to continuing that discussion. We think this is a great starting point, and we think that this is an issue important for the city, and it's certainly an issue that's important for St. Louis Realtors as well. We want people to be able to rent out their homes as short-term rentals. We think that brings a variety of benefits to the city. We also know that we need to weed out bad actors. We think this legislation and the regulatory scheme is important for that. One thing I do want to touch on that we've mentioned a little bit today already is affordable housing. Affordable housing and housing supply is one of the two top priorities for St. Louis Realtors when it comes to our policy agenda. In other markets like Nashville or San Francisco, cities that are dealing with the challenges that come with growth, we've seen this tension between short-term rentals and affordable housing. I would assert that St. Louis has different challenges. We have 25,000 vacant properties in the city of St. Louis. From our perspective, the more investment that we can bring into the city, the more homes that we can have be occupied through whatever means, we think that brings value, and we look forward to continuing to work with the board on this legislation. Thanks.
Thank you. Steve Pona.
Or I guess it's still morning, sorry. Good morning.
Morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do, thank you. And you have to forgive me because I've been sitting here, I've been editing my comments all morning, so forgive me if I'm a little disjointed. I grew up in South City. I've lived in the city most of my life when I lived in St. Louis. My father was a police officer for 33 years. We understand what it's like to live in a neighborhood. My wife and I have the privilege of living in a historic home on Kings Highway. We chose to live on Kings Highway because it brings us close to all the amenities that St. Louis has to offer. So we get the attraction of why you'd want to put an Airbnb in a large house or a short-term rental in a large house. But as it's been touched on numerous times today, these homes were built to residential codes. These were not built to commercial codes. Should they be allowed to accommodate 22, 32? We have a property in Shaw with 48 people capacity. We had a disaster this weekend downtown where not only we experienced a shooting, but we had a young lady trampled and her spinal cord injured because people were trying to escape this commercial property. Can you imagine what happens if we have a fire in one of the large capacity homes? There aren't fire escapes mandated in residential codes. We don't have ADA compliance. We don't have security systems built in. And one of the things I want to make you aware of as you think about the next draft of this bill is that we have experienced the worst of humanity next door to us. And it's not just parties. Parties are easy, right? We have witnessed people who intend and desire to hide in plain sight. And what I mean by that is when you're soliciting prostitution, when you're a child sex trafficking, when you're mutilating animals for future profit, you don't go to hotels anymore. You rent short-term rentals. Those are the things that we're seeing. Those are the things that we think you need to be thinking about. We think you need to get ahead of this issue and not be reactive. I think you need to be thinking 15 years down the road, not 15 years ago. I applaud all of the effort that each of you are putting into this bill and all of the effort that you put into our community on a daily basis. But instead of focusing on tourism, I think you need to be rebuilding our community one home and one family at a time and not one tourist at a time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is, forgive me if I'm not reading the handwriting correctly, William Berga?
William Burge.
Burge? Thank you. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Good morning. My name is Bill Burge. I'm here to speak in opposition to the current proposed bill for short-term rentals in St. Louis City. I've been privileged to be a resident of Shaw since 2012. The home next to me is a 5-bedroom built in 1892. It is the oldest home on my block. It has the intact original carriage house, an extra wide lot, and a yard filled with sun my family covets. The previous resident of the home was an elderly woman, Helen. Helen had lived on my block for over 50 years. She'd raised her kids in that home and 3 others, including my own. In 2021, Helen had to sell her home, and the people who bought it intended to flip it for the staggering sum of $550,000, almost twice the cost of my own home in 2015. Badly over budget and needing to start earning revenue, they decided to turn the entire home into an Airbnb. The home was unilaterally turned from a residential into a commercial property without any oversight or approval, nor any of the laws or staff that would come with a hotel. The worst of it for us was when Charter Communications contractors stayed in the home for 2 to 3 months in early 2023. At times, there were 15-plus commercial bucket lift vehicles lining our street because over a dozen men were staying in the home as a low-cost option to a hotel. These were not vacationers wanting to be in the thick of it. These were workers looking to save costs with complete disregard to the neighborhood and the 4-year-old next door. They woke up nightly thanks to the beep, beep, beep of their commercial vehicles heading out for a day of work every day at 4:30 in the morning. There were 12-plus adults living in one residence that could not legally house 12 SLU students thanks to the city occupancy regulations that forbid more than 3 unrelated parties living in one residence. In advance of this hearing, I looked up the listing for the property and was shocked to see the owners now have 9 full houses in St. Louis on Airbnb. They live in Minnesota. St. Louis has issues, no doubt, and they're never going to get fixed if 9 houses that could hold large families are simply off the market because profiteers are out there profiteering. Affordable housing is a critical issue in our city. The cost of housing has been rising steadily for years, and many people are struggling to afford to live here. Short-term rentals make the problem worse by taking away homes that could otherwise be sold or rented to long-term rentals. We need residents invested in the city. I need a neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I just have a follow-up question, I mean, or maybe you don't need to answer it today, but, if you could weigh in on the committee on, what you'd like to see. I understand you're opposing this legislation.
Sure.
I've
talked about.
So,
Sorry.
if you could just submit, some suggestions or what you'd like to see, recognizing you do want to see regulation,
Sure.
assuming based on
Yeah.
that you don't support this, you're opposed to this legislation. Help us understand the pieces that you'd like to see.
Broadly, I think the number of rentals is insane. Like, to hear someone say that they have 30 short-term rentals is just wild to me. You've obviously looked up various other cities' legislations. I think Atlanta kind of hit like a nice sweet spot. Like, the Atlanta regulation is that you can rent the primary property they're in. So like, if you left for the summer, you could do that because it's your primary residence, and you can have 1 additional residence, and it can hold 6 people. So like, some of these houses that I know of, these 9, they're like, the one next to me is 14 and a 5-bedroom. So there's bunk beds at every bedroom in the room next to me. And so like, somewhere between, like Airbnb particularly, it came out of couch surfing. And I myself, some of my best travel has been, I rented a room from a person in Chicago that couldn't otherwise afford to live in the area they were in, and I talked to them. Like, it made the experience better as somebody that likes to talk to people, but that is not what is happening here. This is a hotel in a residential area without any ability for me to even contact someone to say, hey, I need to look at the side of my house, which means I have to have access to your property. Like, it's just insane what's happening.
Recognizing everybody else in the room, if you, want to submit further thoughts to us via the clerk, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Next on the list is Amanda McCracken. Good morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Perspective to me is really amazing because I am the responsible owner of 7 listings for Airbnb. I don't own or occupy any of them legally, but I own or occupy all of them during the week when my guests aren't there. I'm also a real estate broker for more than 25 years. I have renovated over 50-plus homes in the city of St. Louis. I love this city, and I want to see it prosper. I understand some of the concerns of the people here, but if you have a responsible host who, I take care of I screen every single person who tries to book my homes. I do not allow instant booking. I have families come from all over the world who stay in my homes, and they send me pictures, they tell me stories, they write in the journals. Parking, for instance, I have off-street parking for my tenants, and just because I have 10 people in a unit, they may have 1 car. They may have no cars. Mostly they have 2 cars, no more than that. I do agree with everything that you're doing. I think it's wonderful. I think we should weed out these bad people. And as a realtor, I can tell you, I have written several contracts on houses in the city. My competition is not the owner or a person who's doing an Airbnb. My competition are the young professionals who are moving to the city because they love the area. And I've been beat out of offers over $50,000, but not because of a business. It's because it's a desirable area. And so I would just like to say I do agree that we should have some legislation, but people, you know, they come to St. Louis and they spend a lot of money here. The local grocery store, the coffee shops, they comment and they're so happy to be here and they're coming back. And so I just feel that if we could just all come to some sort of like agreement that where we don't, this is my livelihood. I don't have anything else. I used to be, I'm also a landlord, so I have a few of those, but I can't afford to buy in the city, and it's not because of other owners, it's because there's so much competition with people wanting to live there. So I just would like to have everyone, if we could just kind of see each other's points of view, because without this, I'm not really sure what my next step will be. So this is my livelihood. So I'd just like to thank you for your time, and I hope that we can all be civil and nice to each other and come to some sort of agreement. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a question. Do you live in the city?
My residence is not in the city, but I am working in a house now that I'm going to be moving into the city, and it's just because my children all live in the city now, and so I want to be close to them, and I do love this city.
Do you have Airbnbs outside of the city?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
All my stuff's in the city.
Appreciate it.
Next on the list is Brian Young.
Yes.
Do you affirm to tell the
Yes.
truth? Great, thanks. You may proceed.
Okay, so my name is Brian Young. I'm a resident of the city of St. Louis, have been privileged to live here for over 25 years. I didn't grow up here, so I don't have the high school question, but I know a lot of people. The reason for that is I'm a real estate broker, have been a real estate broker for over 35 years. I help a lot of folks buy and sell properties, not only for their own purposes to live in them, but also as investments, as regular investments, as in some cases they opt to go with short-term rentals. One of the things that I have the privilege of is that we have 4 different groups of investors here in St. Louis that are over 5,000 people that represent tens of thousands of properties, not just in St. Louis City County, but other places. One of the things that we do to help people be very successful at what they do is we educate and train, and we drill down on best practices. When it comes to things like short-term rentals or regular rentals, there are a lot of things you can do to avoid problems. How you screen tenants, for example, how you run your operation. These are not businesses per se. Okay, there's a lot of confusion here. The IRS does not treat investment property as a business. If they did, they'd call it Schedule C. It's Schedule E. It's a whole different way of operating. So there's a lot of confusion here. There's a lot of definitional issues that I think we really do need to discuss to make sure we can figure out how to implement something that makes some sense. Best practices make a huge difference. Best practices include things like meeting your guests, not just flipping them a key or a code. It means screening the people who are coming, having good, solid rules, making sure that you know who's there, making sure that you head off any problems, that you don't allow things like parties, that you don't overcrowd. There are a lot of very common sense things that you can do for both regular rentals and short-term rentals, but this is still housing, and it falls under the category of housing. A lot of folks want to call it hotels. These aren't hotels. Some people might try to treat them like hotels. A house like they were talking about with 30-some people with a handful of bedrooms, clearly that's an overreach. People shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. What we're talking about, though, the vast majority of people who come to stay in short-term rentals are people who are visiting families, going to hospitals. They're people who are looking to relocate to St. Louis. They're people who are exploring neighborhoods before they buy. We have clients who come to town who stay in short-term rentals in order to get a feel for the community before they buy. Things of that sort. The vast majority of the owners of short-term rentals are people who are looking to invest in their properties. They're the good guys. They're the people who are doing the things right. They're the ones picking up the trash up and down the street when the other people aren't. They're the ones who are investing in their property to make them nicer and nicer when other people sometimes aren't. And so there are a lot of things that, a lot of situations that are negative situations. We've heard of a few, but those are outliers compared to the majority, okay? Majority of people are operating well within normal guidelines. They might need a little help, might need a little education, but they are trying to do their best. And if we can include some of that, that would be a huge help. I will throw this out here, I know I'm out of time. I'm happy to be a resource to anyone in this discussion. If we're going to do regulation, let's do smart regulation, not just throw something out there that just screws up a good thing, because for the most part, these are good things.
Thank you. Next on the list is Susan Flair. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Most of my questions, my name is Susan Flair. I'm a resident of Tower Grove South. I've owned my home for 12 years. I've been impacted by an Airbnb that moved in 2 doors away from me for the last 3 years, which, by the way, there was somebody from the assessor's office talking about doubling taxes. That owner has never paid his taxes on the property, by the way. So doubling taxes doesn't work if nobody pays them. Most of my questions are about the language of the bill, which I really appreciate that this is a work in progress, so I have some questions about the way that the language is. So one of my questions is if you could, not today, but when you're thinking about revising the bill, provide a clear definition for the term adjacent as used in the bill, because I am 2 doors away, and I don't know if adjacent means only properties right next door will be able to comment, but like for a liquor license, there's a radius, that's measured in feet or whatever. So if we could define what adjacent means and who gets to comment and who's notified. The bill also states that licenses could be revoked for properties that are classified as nuisances. For a property like mine that I've reported many, many times for nuisance violations, will that impact whether they are issued a license, or will they have a clean slate the date that this legislation takes effect? Next, given the strain on our local police force and their limited capacity to respond to nuisances, which I understand they have their own priorities, but because of that limited capacity to report or register a nuisance, will there be some alternative way to record that these things are happening? Because currently, if I call the police and they don't show up for 4 to 6 hours, they're going to mark that there has not been a nuisance at that property, because there's not a nuisance when they show up. So there needs to be some alternative mechanism to help that happen. And then lastly, this bill seems to focus on short-term rentals in terms of lodging. And if we are thinking about getting ahead of the curve, one of the things that I've seen are a lot of different platforms that will allow you to monetize your property in different ways. I've seen apps that will allow you to rent out your pool by the hour. I've also seen an app that will let you rent out your backyard as a dog park. So if we're thinking about what, 10, 15 years down the road, what people are going to be doing, all of these ways that people are trying to monetize their residential property need to be sort of written in so we can sort of future-proof this. And I know that all of the headline-grabbing things right now are about people getting shot and about, parties and things like that, and those are tragic and they're terrible, and I know that that's what everybody's focused on. But if we think about the way that the population of St. Louis is falling and we're losing people, if it weren't for the way that interest rates and home prices are right now, you'd have lost me, because I'm ready to leave St. Louis. There's no way that any property I bought in St. Louis, this couldn't happen to me again. So there's no incentive for me to stay here, and there's a lot of disincentive. So, and then last, because sounds like I have a couple seconds, you were thinking about how to enforce some of these things and figure out if things are owner occupied. Open up a website that lets people report. We'll all report these people. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person on the list is Aga Young. Okay. Dan Paris.
Set my own timer so I can prioritize my comments. And
Do you affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
You may proceed.
So my name is Dan Paris. I'm a short-term rental host. I live here in the city of St. Louis in the Shaw neighborhood with my family, my wife, and my 4 kids. We live less than 10 minutes away from both of our short-term rentals. I think they're good for St. Louis tourism, good for small businesses. They help with tax revenue. And I think the biggest thing is incentivizing good hosts, and preventing bad ones is really my goal. So overall, I'm very much in support of this bill. I have one area where I think we could maybe make some adjustments, but overall, I think it's a good start. Our target market is families with small children, so we provide baby gates, strollers, playgrounds, sand pits. We really try to appeal to families because we have a bunch of little kids that come to St. Louis and want to go to the zoo, want to go to the Cardinals game, want to go to the City Museum. We have a welcome guide, so everybody who shows up, we make recommendations on local restaurants. So we are helping out small businesses. We're promoting our favorite barbecue places. People are always asking where we go for pizza. We're recommending the local pizza spots. As someone who's lived in St. Louis since he was 4 years old, I'm very proud of this city. So it's really great to be hospitable and to promote how great St. Louis is and all the awesome things we have to offer. I mean, we have a whole Shakespeare thing, and you can go see a play outside for a month in June. There's just so many good things to invite people here for. And I truly believe Airbnb solves a problem that the average hotel can't, which is housing large families with small children or groups of families. A lot of times we have people that come together to meet in one place because someone lives in California or New York, and they like to come meet here. Weddings, hospital visits, as other people talked about, are reasons people visit. Another thing is it helps small businesses. We employ our neighbors to do our landscaping. We have a cleaner who's so thankful for the job because she can bring her kids. Her kids play on the playground, play with our kids' toys that we provide while she cleans the house. We keep handymen, tradesmen busy because we are trying to keep this place like a luxury place to visit, somewhere very nice. Every time somebody lets us know something's broke or not working or they're missing a bowl or anything to cook, we're there to prevent that. We provide that. Overall, we have a 4.9 rating from 350 reviews. So, we are there multiple times a week. We are available all the time. We are welcome to be those people that are called 24/7. The only part of the bill I'd like to push back on is the limit. I think it's more important than setting a cap is the idea in incentivizing good hosts and preventing bad ones. We only have 2 homes, and I like the idea that I could grow my business if I'm doing a really good job. We haven't grown it because we don't want to do anything that's not top quality. But the thing is, I don't want a bad host to have more than 1. Why let them even have 4, right? Like if they're causing crime, having bad reviews, and I think there's systems where we can determine who these bad hosts are. For example, Airbnb has a superhost. You have to have a 4.8 or higher. You have to meet certain requirements. There are ways we could say, hey, if you're doing a really good job and you're helping St. Louis, we want to promote you. And if you're not, we don't want you to have 4. We don't want you to have 1. So that would be my real pushback, is creating a system to determine who are doing a good job at hosting and who's not. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Marvin Notiff. Good morning. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
You may proceed.
Thank you. I first want to say that there are an abundant number of anecdotal stories. We've heard a bunch here. I've heard others at other meetings of this sort. Anecdotal stories are some help, but when we're looking at something as serious as the public policy of the city of St. Louis, we need to start with data. We need to start with facts. We need to start with empirical evidence and findings. I'm an attorney. I'm retired now. My practice, and I live in the city of St. Louis. My office, I intentionally placed in the city of St. Louis because I bought a building. And I practiced over 35 years in representing community associations. 7 years ago or so, after I retired, I scoured the country for university research, industry research, other sources, and data and studies that have been done on short-term rentals, because it had grown phenomenally since it started in about 2012 or so. So now there's a lot of data to study. I gathered this this data, and it was really fascinating stuff. I mean, I started with community associations, but so much of the literature involved local government that I opened my perspective to that, and I put my notes together, my findings together, and an article was published by the American Bar Association in a journal that's intended for local urban policymakers like you guys. It's called The Urban Lawyer. So if any of you would like to see a copy, I'd be happy to send it to you. I want to share that kind of information. I have worked with Christine Ingracia and Heather Navarro. That was like 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm thankful that you're picking up the ball, and I want you to move forward. This is a good start, but it needs a lot more work. I want to focus on just 1 or 2 things that are really critical as you go forward on this. The first one is zoning. Zoning. We have to understand that short-term rental is a business, and what it does is it provides lodging, temporary lodging. It does so by taking existing housing out of the housing supply, to provide temporary lodging for tourists. It does not provide new housing. It does not replace the housing we've lost. We've heard comments, and they've been good, about how that impacts. Well, what happens when you take housing supply out of the housing market, out of the housing stock? You reduce supply, you increase price, and we talk about affordable housing. Is my time up?
It is.
Okay.
I would, again, just recommend any other recommendations that you have can be shared with the committee via email to the clerk. That's boa.clerk@stlouis-mo.gov.
I do have a quick question.
Mr. Browning.
I was, hi Marv, first of all, nice to see you. I do have a quick question about how we.
Question for me?
Yes, how we regulate short-term rentals and making sure that we're getting data from the correct places. I know you've done a lot of work on this, so I was wondering if you have a recommendation of a data source for us to use to analyze short-term rentals in this city and not depend on the platforms themselves to provide that data.
That is a super question, because there are studies like New Orleans. There was a study down there on how effective its ordinance was, and they relied on industry data, like Airbnb, just to name one. And it was not reliable. It was just not accurate. So if you're going to have an ordinance that relies on industry data, I would strongly advise you to have an independent source. There's a housing lab, Housing Justice Lab, that's nonprofit. There's a spinoff of that called Inside Airbnb. There's Granicus, which is a private company. I was very, very concerned that the City of St. Louis, City Hall, Board of Aldermen did not get a study from Granicus, which is, again, a private company. They want our business, but they will scrape data and give us a report. We haven't had a report in a year and a half. And we have over 2,600 listings. And I don't know how the fiscal report that projects 800 permits even reflects the kind of activity, short-term rental activity in the city. I'm sorry the answer was so long, but yes, you do need an independent source of advice. I would not rely on industry data.
Thank you.
Can I ask,
Yeah,
Mr. Nordiff, Marvin, if you don't mind, would you share that, the work you've done with the committee by sending it to the clerk? That's all. That's my request. Thank you.
Article?
Yes, and you mentioned additional work you've done, so please share anything you'd like with the clerk.
Thank you.
Next on the list is Rachel Presley.
Aren't y'all cold? Goodness.
I got 3 shirts on.
I swear to tell the truth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
And you may proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us speak. Thank you for the legislation. I signed the wrong column. I think there are some changes that can be made, but I think that the regulations are good. We have been doing this, as my sister noted, since 2007. And we're atypical. The people who stay sometimes are St. Louisans who are in transition. Sometimes there are obviously a lot of people who are traveling. We follow occupancy codes. We're in apartments. Thank God they are small. 2-person. We have a couple of apartments that could handle 4, but usually just 2 people come. So we're grateful for that. For me, as a property owner, the vacation rentals allow me access to my apartments on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So I get to actually take better care of my property because of these vacation rentals, and it raises the bar for us. I recognize the challenges that we face as a city, and I know that someone had stated early on that it's the Wild West. It's my hope that the legislation that is created is pliable, that allows for growth, and I hope that St. Louis is able to set the stage on healthy legislation that meets all stakeholders: small apartments, large houses, residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, the north side that, we need more investment. Vacation Rental Managers Association, vrma.org, they would be a good resource. And then I also think Matt Curtis, who's out of Austin, Texas, who has the Smart City Policy Group, he would also be a really good outlet for the discussion. I know for me, I am more than happy to participate and help with good, proactive legislation. And I thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Madeline Ehrlich? Wonderful. Do you affirm to tell the truth?
I do, yes.
Thank you.
My name's Madeline. I live in Dogtown and help run one Airbnb that's in the Hill. And I just really appreciate all of the work that y'all have put into this bill, and trying to look at both sides and just for it to be balanced and help St. Louis in general. Just really appreciate. I can tell that y'all put a lot of work into it. Yeah, I just feel like so many people have said so many things, so I feel like I don't really have a whole lot to add, but try really hard to be a good host, and I'm the one that actually cleans the property, goes in multiple times a week, try and keep it as occupied as we can. When we started it, met all of the neighbors and continue to check in with them every time that I see them, asking if they are having any issues. One of the neighbors actually is he's 12 and mows our lawn, and we pay him to do it. And so yeah, just trying in general to both make an extra more money for my family while also trying to be as kind of a neighbor as possible and maintain this property as well. I think a lot of people have said great things. I support the bill, and yeah, just overall support it, and I'm thankful for that. So
thank you.
Thanks.
Elizabeth Clemens. Good morning.
Morning.
Do you affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Yes, hi. My name is Elizabeth Clemens. My husband's name is Welton Clemens, and we have lived in the Shaw area for over 39 years. I am concerned about an Airbnb being developed at 3910. The two people who were living there, they had to be moved out. They were senior citizens in order to find somewhere else to live. I am concerned about our neighborhood not being a family neighborhood. I am concerned about the alley becoming a dumpster alley, because now it has become an alley that's not clean. When we first moved there, the alley was very clean. Now our alley is like a dumpster. I am also concerned about our children. We have little children that plays in the backyard, carefree. Our child is grown, but I am concerned about our other neighbors' children. We live in an area where it's predominantly all different races that live in our neighborhood. I would like to see this continue to grow. I do not want an Airbnb in our neighborhood because we already have no parking on our streets. The people who have garages, we can park there. But when we want to park on the street, there's no parking. So please, I hope you hear what we have to say in the Shaw organization, because I am very concerned. My husband and I are seniors in the neighborhood. I have retired from St. John Mercy from 7 years in September. My husband is retired, so I hope you all would take our appeal and hear what we have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Your husband's also on the list as...
He said he did not want to talk.
Okay, just checking. Thank you. With that, that actually concludes the public testimony portion of this morning. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming out and sharing your thoughts, your opinions, your ideas with the committee. As the sponsor mentioned, this is the first of many hearings to come. I will work on a future hearing date, but I'll tentatively schedule it for July 11th for the next hearing date on these two board bills here. But I will still need to confirm that day and time with members of the committee and the clerk and others. So definitely a tentative date for the next hearing on this board bill or these board bills. Just for those of you that might want to keep abreast of what's happening with respect to them as they move forward through the process. We don't have any other items on the agenda for... I do have the resolution. The resolution will always be on the agenda, and as so much as we have time to take it up, the resolution that's on the agenda is the purpose of the committee. I suppose we could actually have at least an initial conversation around the resolution this morning. Yeah. But again, thank you all for your time. If you're welcome to stay and listen to the discussion as it pertains to the resolution relative to the committee, you certainly don't have to. But thank you again for your time and consideration this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So next item on the agenda is resolutions for review. We've got resolution number 23, which is the priorities for the Transportation and Commerce Committee. Madam Clerk, would you mind reading the resolution for the benefit of the public and for the committee?
One moment.
Do you need a copy of it? Alderman Narayan. Could you hand this to the clerk real quick? Thank you, Alderman.
Resolution number 23, priorities for the Transportation and Commerce Committee. Whereas tourism is a significant industry within the city of St. Louis, contributing millions to the economy and boosting our civic pride, and in order to compete for business within market, the city needs top-tier facilities to host conventions and boost tourism. And whereas St. Louis Lambert International Airport is an economic engine for the St. Louis region and is often the first experience and exposure many travelers have of St. Louis, we must work to improve traveler experience and increase effective use of the airport through infrastructure improvements and design. And whereas public transit is an essential component of any successful city and commerce depends upon the movement of capital and people, we must work to expand and improve services via Metrolink, and Metro Bus. And whereas the process to gain necessary business permits to operate legally in St. Louis is physically and structurally cumbersome. The current process makes it difficult for entrepreneurs to succeed, which in turn negatively impacts our economy. And whereas there is a long-standing need to regulate short-term rentals to protect housing supply, improve quality of life for residents, and ensure that appropriate taxes are collected. And whereas with the passage of Amendment 3 in 2022, the sale of recreational marijuana has been legalized in the state of Missouri. Sales taxes collected through legalization will create a new revenue stream, attract new businesses, and bolster local revenue. However, it is left up to local jurisdictions to regulate the consumption of marijuana in public places. And whereas disparities in how government contracts are awarded continues to exist for minority contractors. And whereas a safer city that works for all families, including those who seek refuge, will aid in population growth and retention. And whereas it is the responsibility of this committee to consider all matters pertaining to business attraction, retention, and development, the city's convention and tourist centers, arts and cultures, commissions, and transportation and commerce industries, including airports, railroads, wharfs, ports, bridges, intercity, state trucking, state and federal highways, public and mass transit. Now therefore be it resolved, the 2023 through 2024 Transportation and Commerce Committee will focus its work on policy that improves our airport, public transit, and facilities, streamlines business permitting and licensing, establishing regulations for short-term rentals and public marijuana consumption, encourages population growth and retention, and supports minority-owned businesses.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Appreciate you taking the time to read through that so thoroughly. I was planning on having this discussion. Obviously, we've spent a great deal of time on Board Bills 33 and 34, so I won't, and I don't anticipate passing this out of committee today, but I would like to solicit feedback from the committee if you have any with respect to other priorities or changes or edits that you might have to the resolution. I will go through and ask each of you if you have any recommendations. Alderwoman Spencer, Vice Chair Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to also maybe point out and add some language around a couple of other aspects of transportation in the St. Louis region, recognizing that we're the second largest inland port in the United States and have such an enormous amount of opportunity there, being on the largest river. I'd also like to maybe point out that we are one of just 3 cities in the United States that have access to all Class A rail, which is an important aspect of commerce and transportation here. Those 3 cities are St. Louis, Chicago, and New Orleans, and it really puts us on the map as far as being able to transport goods throughout the United States. So I think, and I'd also like to maybe consider including that Lambert, while such an incredibly important transportation asset, is part of a network of airports in the St. Louis region, of which there are 3, 2 in Illinois, of course, but just recognizing that we have a set of transportation assets, I would say, in the St. Louis region that we're certainly a major part of, but wanting to maybe interconnect, recognize it. For me, that would be the best way to improve the economic activity here in St. Louis region, kind of connecting these transportation and transit commerce assets.
Wonderful. Any other suggestions or edits, Alderwoman?
We're looking at those were my suggestions. Yeah.
Okay.
If I have any other thing I'd like to contribute, can I email you after? Or does it have to be done right now?
It does not have to be done right now. I don't know if you were here for that particular part of my remarks, Alderwoman, but
I jumped out.
I'm not planning on passing this out today. I'm just soliciting feedback from members of the committee. If you have additions or edits that you'd like to make, if you have those available now, we're happy to have the discussion. Otherwise, if there's recommendations that you want to make by email later, I'm very much open to that as well.
I will look and make a thoughtful, or at least let you know if I don't have any thoughtful suggestions.
Wonderful. Alderman Narayan.
Thank you, Chairman Cohn. Just a couple of things, and this, I think, largely overlaps with some discussions that are happening in other committees too. But just since when I think of transportation, I think of both, things like our ports and our airports, as well as the ability to move around our city just in general, whether that's through the metro system or even our sidewalks and various bike infrastructure. I'd be remiss if Mr. Ogilvy over in City Hall will certainly be unhappy with me if I don't bring up bike infrastructure. I do want to make sure that as we are looking at transportation in general, that we're also including our sidewalks, many of which are aging and have serious ADA issues. I know throughout my neighborhood, as people are getting older, the fact that the sidewalks are uneven and sometimes in disrepair has been more and more of an issue for people who want to walk to the various amenities throughout the neighborhood. And we're hearing more and more from various stakeholder groups that want to see things like protected bike infrastructure, whether that be something like the GRG project that was in this committee last week, I guess, or no, excuse me, that was in public infrastructure, excuse me. But whether it be things like the GRG project or just the idea of protected bike lanes in general, we're seeing that in a lot of other cities, and it seems to be greatly reducing the amount of crashes between automobiles and bicyclists.
I appreciate that, Alderman. I do, as it pertains to the resolution, we have to also be somewhat cognizant and sensitive to the overlap with committees as well.
Absolutely.
So public infrastructure does cover many of those topics. I do like the thought process behind that though too, because cycling in particular is a mode of transit for many residents. It's not a hobby for many people. So I do think that, in terms of when we talk about this committee and transportation and commerce, it's usually in the vein of transportation being a component of our commerce system. And certainly as more and more residents are cycling to and from their place of employment or destination for shopping or groceries or what have you, that certainly does become more of a component of our commerce system as well. So I'm intrigued by that, and certainly think that maybe there's a way that we can do that that doesn't necessarily directly interfere or conflict with the Public Infrastructure Committee and their responsibilities as well, but definitely appreciate where you're going with that. I think that that's pretty awesome. Alderman Browning.
Yeah, thank you. And as the Vice Chair of Public Infrastructure and Utilities, I'd say that that's definitely a priority of ours. We're going to be looking at that, and sidewalks especially too. We know we have a lot of work to do there, and I appreciate your concern and agree with it on those matters. I honestly don't think it would hurt to have more people looking at that kind of stuff. But speaking of keeping the purview within the committees, I was wondering on the item about streamlining business operations and specifically permits and whatnot. if that is better suited for the special committee on red tape that was established.
So, and this is where I get into a little bit of a sticky wicket. There's always a little bit of crossover between committees. Sometimes that's by design, sometimes it's unintentional. At the time that we were crafting the definitions for committees and our rules, the special committee was not created, right? And so these largely follow what have been designated as our responsibilities underneath our rules. And the special committee only follows for this session or until it concludes its business. But it can't extend beyond the session. So the resolution obviously also would not pass. It's for this specific session. But at the time that we were in the process of drafting this as well, we had not actually adopted the resolution for the special committee. So I would prefer to leave that in there just in case future, generations of older people would like to look back on this in terms of what we are trying to accomplish. And there is also providing latitude depending upon what either committee, whether it's the special committee on red tape or this committee has on their particular list of to-dos, that there's some flexibility for the president to be able to assign those resolutions or board bills to either committee depending upon, what they're in the middle of at that particular moment in time.
Fair enough. I appreciate that explanation. It makes sense to me. I think we've got our plate full as it is, and so, I'm fine with leaving that in there just in case kind of thing. But yeah, between short-term rental regulation, marijuana tax, and a bunch of other things, I think we're going to have our hands full.
Amongst many other items, for sure. So I have a list here of various items that you all have brought to my attention. I will reach out to each of you to continue those conversations. And, Alderwoman, as I mentioned, and this is not just exclusive to the Alderwoman from the 6th, but if any of you have additional thoughts or feedback pertaining to the resolution, please feel free to reach out to me. And, we'll continue this conversation at a later date, later committee hearing so that we can get this passed out. I know that we'd like to try and get it passed out before the summer recess, just so that because this is essentially setting the agenda for our future topics and discussions. So more to come. But other than that, there's no other items for discussion. I believe I made an announcement for the next at least tentative date for July 11th. I will clear that with everyone and make that official a little bit later. That is, to be clear, that is for the Airbnb legislation. There will likely be another committee hearing next week because we do have other board bills before us outside of those that we need to review and discuss and possibly pass. So I'll also work on another hearing date for earlier than July 11th. I don't know if that's next week or the week after, although all these weeks are starting to blend in together at this point. Excused alderpersons, I was not asked by Alderwoman Tyus or provided with a reason, so at this point I would not excuse her absence from the committee. And then is there a motion to adjourn? Otherwise, all members were present.
I would like to motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The Transportation and Commerce Committee stands adjourned.